All right, Josh, Mr. Mike Horan here again for my video on Module 3. And as I went through Module 3, I really kind of connected with it because one of the things that I've always considered myself to be is a defensive driver. And when I taught my 5 kids to drive, I've tried to make it a point to them to make sure they understand it's important to be a defensive driver out there and look for mistakes that other people make. So for this lesson, we're going to talk about the SIPTA system. SIPTA is an acronym. Each one of the letters stands for the different steps that you're going to use to make sure that you're a defensive driver. Scan, identify, predict, decide, and execute, and I'll go through each one of those individually. But as I was going through this and watching different videos and going through the modules, the information that you gave me, I couldn't help but think about the scientific method. I think you know that I teach at the alternative school here in Marshall County, so I teach everything. And I've taught science for probably 10 years that I've been here. And when I looked at these steps, I couldn't help but look at the comparison between that and the scientific method, right? Step 1, observe. We use our senses so we can scan and see what's out there on the roads. Define the problem. Okay, so when we notice something on the roads while we're driving, so we got to identify what that potential problem might be. Then from there, as a scientist, we're going to come up with a hypothesis, which some people like to say educated guess. I don't like those words, but it's more like a prediction based on those observations, that we have. The 4th step in the scientific method is come up with an experiment. Well, out here on the roads, we sometimes have to experiment. We have to think on the spot, when things happen quickly. And we have to be able to adjust to what happens to us out on the roads, whether it's weather, accidents, construction, it can be a lot of things. Animals running on the road, those are things that we have to do and decide quickly, what we're going to do. And then the last step of the scientific method, analyze the data. And that means take in all that data that we have and then execute and come up with a plan and exactly, what is it that we're going to do. So I couldn't help but think about the scientific method, and this is also a good way to be cross-curricular, using science and driver's ed at the same time. So when we talk about the SIPTA system, when driving you have to perform many tasks at once, such as controlling the car, reading signs, and reacting to other drivers. The SIPTA system is an organized way to gather and process information. Using this system will help you make decisions and hopefully reduce some of the risks when you're driving and having accidents. And when we look here, I like this picture because it tells us we not only have to be observing what's close to us, but we also need to be observing what's ahead of us, especially when we can on a straightaway. So we know and we can make up our decisions in advance. All right, again, what does SIPTA stand for? Search, scan, identify, predict, decide, and execute. Let's look at each one of these individually. First of all, just like the first step of the scientific method, search or scanning has to do with using our senses, right? Our eyes, our ears. We can see what's out there. Check your rear view and side mirrors, looking for oncoming traffic and looking for traffic approaching from left, right, or behind you. So again, what is that going to entail? As we're driving, we need to be sometimes, expecting things to happen. We not only need to know what's right in front of us, but we want to maybe look ahead of us, maybe a few blocks, or if we're on a straightaway on the interstate, we can see maybe an accident that has occurred or some construction that's coming up. Using our rear view mirror, our side mirrors, but definitely making sure we don't rely on those side mirrors, and we also use our blind spot, right? So that's the first step, is we have to search and scan the road, not only what's close to us, but what's maybe ahead of us or behind us. You never know when you come up, when somebody stops abruptly in front of you, it's always important to look in that rearview mirror. I think about the bridge here we have in town that I live in, that there's a light on the other side of this bridge, and you can't always see it. So when it changes, I always look behind me to make sure the person behind me is stopping as well. All right, next step is, like in the scientific method, define the problem. Well, we want to identify objects out on the road. Again, what are we looking for? We're scanning. We're looking for possible somebody in front of us stopping abruptly. We're looking at possible accidents coming up on an intersection. Is somebody going to possibly run a stop sign or try to get through a red light? When we drive around roads in West Virginia, we know that there's lots of animals around. When you see that sign for deer, there's certain areas, I know, like driving to Morgantown where our kids go to school over the years. There's a lot of that. So you got to be looking, for those kind of things. And again, making sure that we see these things and expect them to happen. So identify what the problem is. Construction's another big one. Pedestrians, animals, any debris that's on the road. One of the things I like to use is the Waze app. It will tell you a lot of this stuff from other drivers. Third is, again, prediction, hypothesis. Okay, predict what changes in conditions or near the road could increase your level of risk. Predict what could happen ahead of you to determine what you would do next. So here I'm looking at, especially we're coming up on winter here, unfortunately. And again, what are the conditions on the road? A lot of times we can't tell things like black ice on the road. So we have to sometimes predict or come up with a hypothesis of what are the conditions, what are the cautions, and then come up with some kind of a plan on how we're going to do that. Next, we have to decide then what are we going to do based on, again, step 4, the experiment. Decide what actions you need to take to avoid the hazard. Decide how to act based on the type of hazard you have. Is it weather related? Is it an accident, construction, animal, whatever it is? A single hazard, car on the side of the road. One of the things that you have to be aware of is the move over law here in West Virginia. If you see a police officer ahead of you with somebody pulled over, they're supposed to have their lights on. This happened to me, unfortunately, a few years ago, where I got pulled over because, again, I didn't feel like I could safely move over to the left lane. But again, those are things you have to be aware of, so look for those lights ahead of you. Multiple hazards, multi-car accidents. Around the Wheeling area, we have these happen, especially around the interstates, so this can happen. Stationary hazard, this is more road construction. My wife and I had this happen a few years ago coming back from the gym at night, and we were getting up onto a ramp to get on the highway to come home, and here this big piece of metal was dropped on the highway and by somebody, and we didn't know it, ran over it, ended up having to put a lot of money into a transmission because of it. But again, I had no way to see it because it was dark out. And then moving hazards, slowly moving vehicles, flying debris. You never know if you have a truck in front of you, for example, that has a bunch of stuff on the back of the truck. Sometimes that stuff can fall off. So don't get too close to vehicles like that. All right, then the last step, just like in a scientific method, analyzing the data, execute. What are we going to do based on all of this information, right? Based on all the information that we've now taken in through all these steps in SIPTA, then what are we going to do? What decision are we going to make based on all of this stuff? Examples of changes you could make: slowing down, changing lanes, speeding up, stopping your car completely. Sometimes you have to stop completely. Had that happen. Do I need to change lanes quickly? Well, if I do, then I better be checking my mirrors and my blind spot to make sure nobody's coming there. Or just changing direction completely, maybe going a different direction. Thanks to the Waze app, they usually help us with a lot of those things. So that is the SIPTA method, which has to do with defensive driving, which I've been a pretty good defensive driver in my driving career, and I've tried to teach my kids the same way. Thank you.